that hissing pant, as regular and full-volumed as the exhaust of an engine, spoke of a monstrous organism. Once, as it moved, I thought I saw the glint of two terrible greenish eyes. There was an uneasy rustling, as if it were crawling slowly forward. "I believe it is going to spring," said I, cocking my rifle. "Don't fire, don't fire," whispered Lord John. "The crash of a gun in this silent night will be heard for miles. Keep it as a last card." "If it gets over the hedge, we're done," said somebody, and his voice crackled into a nervous laugh as he spoke. "No, it must not get over," cried Lord John, "but hold your fire to the last. Perhaps I can make something of the fellow. I'll chance it anyhow." It was as brave an act as ever I saw a man do. He stooped to the fire, picked up a blazing branch, and slipped in an instant through a sally port, and made to our gateway. They moved forward with a dreadful snarl. Lord John never hesitated, but running towards it with a quick, light step, he dashed the flaming wood into the brute's face. For one moment, I had a vision of a horrible mask, like a giant toad's, of a warty, leprous skin, and a loose mouth, all beslobbered with fresh blood. The next, there was a crash in the underwood, and our dreadful visitor was gone. "I thought he wouldn't face the fire," said Lord John, laughing, as he came back and threw his branch among the faggots. "You should not have taken such a risk," we all cried. "There was nothing else to be done. If he had got among us, we should have shot each other and tried to down him. On the other hand, if we had fired through the hedge and wounded him, he would soon have been on the top of us.
So we'll let it all hang out and zip and let the wind hit my wing.
On the
Nice,
whole,
Jay.
I think that we
Otherwise
have
I'm
got
ready.
well out of it. What was he then?" Our learned men looked at each other with some hesitation.
Just please.
Personally, I am unable to classify the creature with any certainty, said somebody, lighting his pipe from the fire. "In refusing to commit yourself, you are but showing a proper scientific reserve," said Challenger, with massive condescension. "I am not myself prepared to go farther than to say, in general terms, that we have almost certainly been in contact tonight with some form of carnivorous dinosaur. I have already expressed my anticipation that something of the sort might exist on this plateau. We have to bear in mind," remarked somebody, "that there are many prehistoric forms which have never come down to us. It would be rash to suppose that we can give a name to all that we are likely to meet." "Exactly. A rough classification may be the best that we can attempt. Tomorrow, some further evidence may help us to an identification. Meantime, we can only renew our interrupted slumbers." "But not without a sentinel," said Lord John with decision. "We can't afford to take chances in a country like this. 2-hour spells in the future for each of us." "Then I'll just finish my pipe and start."
I'm sad and I could talk to someone. Can I vent to you? Sure.
And from that
Vent away.
time onwards, we never trusted ourselves again without a watchman. In the morning, it was not long before we discovered the source of the hideous uproar which had aroused us in the night. The Adonai glade was the scene of a horrible butchery. From the pools of blood and the enormous lumps of flesh scattered in every direction over the green sward, we imagined at first that a number of animals had been killed.
For the love
But
of
on
God.
examining the remains more closely, we discovered that
For the
all
love
this carnage
of
came from one of those unusual monsters, which had been torn to pieces by some creature not larger
Alright, so
perhaps,
you're a serial killer, I can tell. Thank you, Dave.
than itself. Our two professors sat in absorbed argument, examining piece after piece, which showed the marks of savage teeth
For the
and of enormous
longest
claws.
time.
Our judgments must still be in abeyance.
For the love of God.
With a huge slab of whitish-colored flesh across his
For the
knee.
love of God.
The indications would be consistent with the presence of a sailor
Probably registered
such as are still found among the
100 since
our
Outsiders.
temples.
As
But
in,
the
keep it
creature
100.
at the sea was undoubtedly of a larger and more reptilian character.
Just chill.
Personally, I should pronounce for Allosaurus or Megalosaurus, said someone.
What's that?
Exactly. Any of the large carnivorous dinosaurs would meet the case. Among them are to be found all the most terrible types of animal life that have ever
longest
cursed the earth or west of the sea. He laughed sonorously at his own conceit, for though
He laughed
this
sonorously at his own
the
conceit.
clearest pleasantry from his own lips moved him always to roars of appreciation. The less noise, the better, said Lord Ralston curtly. We don't know who or what may be near us. If this fella comes back for his breakfast and catches us here, we won't have so much to laugh at. By the way, what is this
Driving
on the iguanagon's hide? On the dull, scaly, slate-colored skin somewhere above the shoulder, there was a singular black circle of some substance which looked like asphalt. None of us could suggest what it meant, though somebody was of opinion that he had seen something similar upon one of the young ones 2 days before. Challenger said nothing, but looked pompous and puffy, as if he could if he would, so that finally Lord John asked his opinion direct. If your lordship will graciously permit me to open my mouth, I shall be happy to express my sentiments, said he with elaborate sarcasm. I am not in the habit of being taken to task in the fashion which seems to be customary with your lordship. I was not aware that it was necessary to ask your permission before smiling at a harmless pleasantry. It was not until he had received his apology that our touchy friend would suffer himself to be appeased. When at last his ruffled feelings were at ease, he addressed us at some length from his seat upon a fallen tree, speaking, as his habit was, as if he were imparting most precious information to a class of 1,000. With regard to the marking, said he, I am inclined to agree with my friend and colleague, Professor Summerlee, that the stains are from asphalt. As this plateau is, in its very nature, highly volcanic, and as asphalt is a substance which one associates with plutonic forces, I cannot doubt that it exists in the free liquid state, and that the creatures may have come in contact with it. A much more important problem is the question as to the existence of the carnivorous monster which has left its traces in this glade. We know roughly that this plateau is not larger than an average English county. Within this confined space, a certain number of creatures, mostly types which have passed away in the world below, have lived together for innumerable years. Now,
Backflip now. Gregory, take teacher. Whoa.
One would have expected that the carnivorous creatures, multiply unchecked, would have exhausted their food supply and have been compelled to either modify their flesh-eating habits or die of hunger. This, we see, has not been so. We can only imagine, therefore, that the balance of nature is preserved by some check which limits the numbers of these ferocious creatures. One of the many interesting problems, therefore, which await our solution, is to discover what that check may be and how it operates. I venture to trust that we may have some future opportunity for the closer study of the carnivorous dinosaurs. And I venture to trust we may not, I observed. The professor only raised his great eyebrows as the schoolmaster meets the irrelevant observation of the naughty boy. Perhaps Professor Summerlee may have an observation to make, he said, and the two savants ascended together into some rarefied scientific atmosphere, where the possibilities of a modification of the birth rate were weighed against the decline in the food supply as a check in the struggle for existence. That morning we mapped out a small portion of the plateau, avoiding the swamp of the pterodactyls and keeping to the east of our brook instead of to the west. In that direction the country was still thickly wooded, with so much undergrowth that our progress was very slow. I am dwelt up to now upon the terrors of Maple White Island. But there was another side to the subject, for all that morning we wandered among lovely flowers, mostly, as I observed, white or yellow in color, these being, as our professors explained, the primitive flower shade. In many places the ground was absolutely covered with them, and as we walked ankle-deep on that wonderful evening carpet, the scent was almost intoxicating in its sweetness and intensity. The homely English bee buzzed everywhere around us. Many of the trees under which we passed had their branches bowed down with fruit, some of which were of familiar sorts, while other varieties were new. By observing which of them were pecked by birds, we avoided all danger of poison, and added a delicious variety to our food reserve. In the jungle which we traversed were numerous hard-trodden paths made by the wild beasts, and in the more marshy places we saw a profusion of strange footmarks, including many of the iguanodon. Once, in a grove, we observed several of these great creatures grazing, and Lord John, with his glass, was able to report that they also were spotted with asphalt, though in a different place to the one which we had examined in the morning. What this phenomenon meant, we could not imagine. We saw many small animals, such as porcupines, a scaly anteater, and a wild pig, piebald in color and with long curved tusks. Once, through a break in the trees, we saw a clear shoulder of green hill some distance away, and across this, a large, dun-colored animal was traveling at a considerable pace. It passed so swiftly that we were unable to say what it was. But if it were a deer, as was claimed by Lord John, it must have been as large as those monstrous Irish elk, which are still dug up from time to time in the bogs of my native land. Ever since the mysterious visit which had been made to our camp, we always returned to it with some misgivings. However, on this occasion, we found everything in order. That evening we had a grand discussion upon our present situation and future plans, which I must describe at some length, as it led to a new departure, by which we were enabled to gain a more complete knowledge of Maple White Land than might have come in many weeks of exploring it. It was Summerlee who opened the debate. All day he had been querulous in manner, and now some remark of Lord John's as to what we should do on the morrow brought all his bitterness to a head. What we ought to be doing today, tomorrow, and all the time, said he, is finding some way out of the trap into which we have fallen. You are all turning your brains towards getting into this country. I say that we should be scheming how to get out of it. I am surprised, sir, boomed Challenger, stroking his majestic beard, that any man of science should commit himself to so ignoble a sentiment. You are in a land which offers such an inducement to the ambitious naturalist as none ever has since the world began. And you suggest leaving it before we have acquired more than the most superficial knowledge of it or of its contents. I expected better things of you, Professor Summerlee. You must remember, said Summerlee sourly, that I have a large class in London who are at present at the mercy of an extremely inefficient locum tenens. This makes my situation different from yours, Professor Challenger, since, so far as I know, you have never been entrusted with any responsible educational work. Quite so, said Challenger. I have felt it to be a sacrilege to divert a brain which is capable of the highest original research to any lesser object. That is why I have sternly set my face against any proffered scholastic appointment. For example, asked Summerlee with a sneer.
Jeez Louise.
But Lord John hastened to change the conversation. I must say, said he, that I think it would be a mighty poor thing to go back to London before I know a great deal more of this place than I do at present. I could never dare to walk into the back office of my paper and face old McArdle, said I. You will excuse the frankness of this report, will you not, sir? He'd never forgive me for leaving such unexhausted copy behind me.
Oh, dang.
Besides, so far as I can see, it is not worth discussing, since we can't get down, even if we wanted. Our young friend makes up for many obvious mental lacunae by some measure of primitive common sense, remarked Challenger. The interests of his deplorable profession not immaterial to us, but as he observes, we cannot get down in any case, so it is a waste of energy to discuss it. It is a waste of energy to do anything else, growled Summerlee from behind his pipe. Let me remind you that we came here upon a perfectly definite mission, entrusted to us at the meeting of the Zoological Institute in London. That mission was to test the truth of Professor Challenger's statements. Those statements, as I am bound to admit, we are now in a position to endorse. Our ostensible work is therefore done. As to the detail which remains to be worked out upon this plateau, it is so enormous that only a large expedition with a very special equipment could hope to cope with it. Should we attempt to do so ourselves, the only possible result must be that we shall never return with the important contribution to science which we have already gained. Professor Challenger has devised means for getting us onto this plateau when it appeared to be inaccessible. I think that we should now call upon him to use the same ingenuity in getting us back to the
I'm
world
live right now.
from
Go
which we
show
came.
love to my live stream, please. I hit the like button for you. I'm live right now. Hell yeah.
Even Challenger was affected by the consideration that his enemies would never stand confuted if the confirmation of his statements should never reach those who had doubted them. The problem of the descent is at first sight a formidable one, said he, and yet I cannot doubt that the intellect can solve it. I am prepared to agree with our colleague that the protracted stay in Maple White Land is at present inadvisable, and that the question of our return will soon have to be faced. I absolutely refuse to leave, however, until we have made at least a superficial examination of this country and are able to take back with us something in the nature of a chart. Professor Summerlee gave a snort of impatience. We have spent 2 long days in exploration, said he, and we are no wiser as to the actual geography of the place than when we started. It is clear that it is all thickly wooded, and it would take months to penetrate it and to learn the relations of one part to another. If there were some central peak, it would be different, but it all slopes downwards so far as we can see. The farther we go, the less likely it is that we will get any general view. It was at that moment that I had my inspiration. My eyes chanced to light upon the enormous gnarled trunk of the ginkgo tree, which cast its huge branches over us. Surely, if its bole exceeded that of all others, its height must do the same. If the rim of the plateau was indeed the highest point, then why should this mighty tree not prove to be a watchtower which commanded the whole country? Now, ever since I ran wild as a lad in Ireland, I have been a bold and skilled tree climber. My comrades might be my masters on the rocks, but I knew that I would be supreme among those branches. Could I only get my legs onto the lowest of the giant offshoots, then it would be strange indeed if I could not make my way to the top. My comrades were delighted at my idea. Our young friend, said Challenger, bunching up the red apples of his cheeks, is capable of acrobatic exertions which would be impossible to a man of more solid, though possibly of more commanding appearance. I applaud his resolution. By George, young fella, you've put your hand on it, said Lord John, clapping me on the back. How we never came to think of it before, I can't imagine. There's not more than an hour of daylight left, but if you take your notebook, you may be able to get some rough sketch of the place. If we put these 3 ammunition cases under the branch, I will soon host you onto it. He stood on the boxes while I faced the trunk, and was gently raising me when Challenger sprang forward and gave me such a thrust with his huge hand that he fairly shot me into the tree. With both arms clasping the branch, I scrambled hard with my feet until I had first my body and then my knees onto it. There were 3 excellent offshoots, like huge rungs of a ladder above my head, and a tangle of convenient branches beyond, so that I clambered onward with such speed that I soon lost sight of the ground and had nothing but foliage beneath me. Now and then I entered a check, and once I had to ship up a creeper for 8 or 10 feet. But I made excellent progress, and the booming of Challenger's voice seemed to be a great distance beneath me. The tree was, however, enormous, and looking upwards, I could see no thinning of the leaves above my head. There was some thick bush-like clump which seemed to be a parasite upon the branch up which I was smoking. I leaned my head round it in order to see what was beyond.
Oh my God, just tell me my account number, please.
In my surprise and horror at what I saw. A face was gazing into mine at the distance of only a foot or 2. The creature that owned us had been crouching behind the parasite and had looked round it at the same instant that I did. It was a human face, or at least it was far more human than any monkey's that I have ever seen. It was long, whitish, and blotched with pimples, the nose flattened, and the lower jaw projecting, with a bristle of coarse whiskers round the chin. The eyes, which were under thick and heavy brows, were bestial and ferocious, and as it opened its mouth to snarl what sounded like a curse at me, I observed that it had curved, sharp canine teeth. For an instant, I read hatred and menace in the evil eyes. Then, as quick as a flash, came an expression of overpowering fear. There was a crash of as it dived wildly down into the tangle of green. I caught a glimpse of a hairy body like reddish pig, and then it was gone amid a swirl of leaves and branches. "What's the matter?" shouted Roxton from below. "Anything wrong with you?" "Did you see it?" I cried, with my arms round the branch and all my nerves tingling. "Oh, we heard a growl as if your foot had slipped. What was it?" I was so shocked at the sudden and strange appearance of this ape-man that I hesitated whether I should not climb down again and tell my experience to my companion. But I was already so far up the big tree that it seemed a humiliation to return without having carried out my mission. After a long pause, therefore, to recover my breath and my courage, I continued my ascent. Once, I put my weight upon a rocky branch, swung for a few seconds by my hands. But in the main, it was all easy climbing. Gradually, the leaves thinned around me, and I was aware, from the wind upon my face, that I had topped all the trees of the forest. I was determined, however, not to look about me before I had reached the very highest point. So I scrambled on until I had got so far that the topmost branch was bending beneath my weight. There I settled into a convenient fork, and balancing myself securely, I found myself looking down at a most wonderful panorama of this strange country in which we found ourselves. The sun was just above the western skyline, and the evening was a particularly bright and clear one, so that the whole extent of the plateau was visible beneath me. It was, as seen from this height, of an oval contour, with a breadth of about 30 miles and a width of 20. Its general shape was that of a shallow funnel, all the sides sloping down to a considerable lake in the center. This lake may have been 10 miles in circumference, and lay very green and beautiful in the evening light, with a thick fringe of reeds at its edges, and with its surface broken by several yellow sandbanks which gleamed golden in the mellow sunshine.
My God.
A number of long dark objects, which were too large for alligators, too long for canoes, lay upon the edges of these patches of sand. With my glass, I could clearly see that they were alive, but what their nature might be, I could not imagine. From the side of the plateau on which we were, slopes of woodland with occasional glades stretched down for 5 or 6 miles to the central lake. I could see at my very feet the glade of the iguanodons, and farther off was a round opening in the trees which marked the swamp of the pterodactyls. On the side facing me, however, the plateau presented a very different aspect.
Oh my God. Come on.
There, the basalt cliffs of the outside were reproduced upon the inside, forming an escarpment about 200 feet high, with a woody slope beneath it. Along the base of these red cliffs, some distance above the ground, I could see a number of dark holes through the glass, which I conjectured to be the mouths of caves. At the opening of one of these, something white was shimmering, but I was unable to make out what it was. I sat charting the country until the sun had set, and it was so dark that I could no longer distinguish details. Then I climbed down to my companions, waiting for me so eagerly at the bottom of the great tree. For once, I was the hero of the expedition. Alone I had thought of it, and alone I had done it. And here was the chart which would save us a month's blind groping among unknown dangers. Each of them shook me solemnly by the hand. But
Good God, just work.
The details of my map, I had to tell them of my encounter with the ape man among the branches.
Does Pace not work
all
anymore?
the time, said I. How do you know that? Asked Lord John. Because I have never been without that feeling that something malevolent was watching us. I mentioned it to you, Professor Challenger. Our young friend certainly said something of the kind. He is also the one among us who is endowed with that Celtic temperament which would make him sensitive to such impressions. The whole theory of telepathy, began Summerlee, filling his pipe, is too vast to be now discussed, said Challenger with decision. Tell me now, he added, with the air of a bishop addressing a Sunday school, did you happen to observe whether the creature could cross its thumb over its paw? No, indeed. Had it a tail? No. Was the foot prehensile? I do not think it could have made off so fast among the branches if it could not get a grip of its feet. In South America there are, if my memory serves me, you will check the observation, Professor Summerlee, some 36 species of monkeys, but the anthropoid ape is unknown. It is clear, however, that he exists in this country, and that he is not the hairy gorilla-like variety which is never seen out of Africa or the East. I was inclined to interpolate, as I looked at him, that I had seen his first cousin in Kensington. This is a whiskered and colorless type, the latter characteristic pointing to the fact that he spends his days in arboreal seclusion. The question which we have to face is whether he approaches more closely to the ape or the man. In the latter case, he may well approximate to what the vulgar have called the missing link. The solution of this problem is our immediate duty. It is nothing of the sort, said Summerlee abruptly. Now that, through the intelligence and activity of Mr. Malone, I cannot help quoting the words, we have got our chart. Our one and only immediate duty is to get ourselves safe and sound out of this awful place. The flesh pots of civilization, groaned Challenger.
Oh my goodness.
The ink pots of civilization.
Yellow.
It is our task to put on record what we have seen, and to leave the further exploration to others. You all agreed as much before Mr. Malone got on the chart. I admit that I will be more at ease when I am assured that the result of our expedition has been conveyed to our friends. No. I have not as yet an idea. I have never yet encountered a problem, however, which my inventive brain was unable to solve. And I promise you that tomorrow
We're doing
I will
good.
turn my attention to the question of our descent. And so the matter was allowed to rest. But that evening, by the light of the fire and of a single candle, The first map of the lost world was elaborated. Every detail which I had roughly noted from my watchtower was drawn out in its relative place. Challenger's pencil hovered over the great blank which marked the lake.
Come on.
Why? He asked. Why should you not take the chance of perpetuating your own name? Said somebody with his usual touch of acidity. I trust, sir, that my name will have other and more personal claims upon posterity, said Challenger severely. Any ignoramus can hand down his worthless memory by imposing it upon a mountain or a river. I need no such monument. Somebody, with a twisted smile, was about to make some fresh assault when Lord John hastened to intervene. It's up to you, young fella, to name the lake, said he. You saw it first, and by George, if you choose to put Lake Malone on it, no one has a better right. By all means, let our young friend give it a name, said Challenger. Then, said I, blushing, I dare say, as I said it, let it be named Lake Gladys. Don't you think the Central Lake would be more descriptive? Remarked somebody. I should prefer Lake Gladys. Challenger looked at me sympathetically and shook his great head in mock disapproval. Boys will be boys, said he. Lake Gladys, let it be. Chapter 12. It was dreadful in the forest. I have said, or perhaps I have not said, for my memory plays me sad tricks these days, that I glowed with pride when 3 such men as my comrades thanked me for having saved, or at least greatly helped, the situation. As the youngster of the party, not merely in years, but in experience, character, knowledge, and all that goes to make a man, I had been overshadowed from the first, and now I was coming into my own. I mourned at the thought. Alas, for the pride which goes before a fall. That little glow of self-satisfaction, that added measure of self-confidence, were to lead me on that very night to the most dreadful experience of my life, ending with a shock which turns my heart sick when I think of it. It came about in this way. I had been unduly excited by the affection of a tree, and sleep seemed to be impossible. Somebody was on guard, sitting hunched over our small fire, a quaint, angular figure, his rifle across his knees, and his pointed, goat-like beard wagging with each weary nod of his head. Lord John lay silent, wrapped in the South American poncho which he wore, while Challenger snored with a roll and rattle which reverberated through the woods. The full moon was shining brightly, and the air was briskly cold. What a night for a walk! And then suddenly came the thought, why not? Suppose I stole softly away. Suppose I made my way down to the Central Lake. Suppose I was back at breakfast with some record of the place. Would I not, in that case, be thought an even more worthy associate? Then, if someone had carried the day and some means of escape were found, we should return to London with first-hand knowledge of the central mystery of the plateau, to which I alone, of all men, would have penetrated. I thought of Gladys, with her heroisms all around us. I seemed to hear her voice as she said it. I thought also of her voice. What a thrill!
Yes, these dogs are
what a foundation for a career. A correspondentship in the next great war might be within my reach. I clutched at a gun. My pockets were full of cartridges, and parting the thorn bushes at the gate of our Zariba, quickly slipped out. My last glance showed me the unconscious somebody, most futile of sentinels, still nodding away like a queer mechanical toy in front of the smoldering fire. I had not gone 100 yards before I deeply repented my rashness. I may have said somewhere in this chronicle that I am too imaginative to be a really courageous man, but that I have an overpowering fear of seeming afraid. This was the power which now carried me onwards. I simply could not slink back with nothing done. Even if my comrades should not have missed me and should never know of my weakness, there would still remain some intolerable self-shame in my own soul.
Okay, come on.
And yet I shuddered at the position in which I found myself, and would have given all I possessed at that moment to have been honorably free of the whole business.
Come on.
It was dreadful in the forest. The trees grew so thickly and their foliage spread so widely that I could see nothing of the moonlight, save that here and there the high branches made a tangled filigree against the starry sky. As the eyes became more used to the obscurity, one learned that there were different degrees of darkness among the trees.
Darkness has won.
While between and among them there were cold black shadowed patches like the mouths of caves, from which I shrank in horror as I passed. I thought of the despairing yell of the tortured iguanodon, that dreadful cry which had echoed through the woods. I thought, too, of the glimpse I had in the light of Lord John's torch of that bloated, warty, blood-slavering muzzle.
Yeah.
Even now I was on its hunt. Like spring upon me from the shadows, this nameless and horrible monster. I stopped, and picking a cartridge from my pocket, I opened the breech of my gun. As I touched the lever, my heart leaped within me. It was the shotgun, not the rifle, which I had taken. Again, the impulse to return swept over me. Here, surely, was a most excellent reason for my failure, one for which no one would think the less of me. But again, the foolish pride fought against that very word. I could not, must not, fail. After all, my rifle would probably have been as useless as a shotgun against such dangers as I might meet. If I were to go back to camp to change my weapon, I could hardly expect to enter and leave again without being seen. In that case, there would be explanations, and my attempts would no longer be all my own. After a little hesitation, then, I screwed up my courage and continued upon my way, my useless gun under my arm. The darkness of the forest had been alarming, but even worse, was the white, still flood of moonlight in the open glade of the iguanodons. Hid among the bushes, I looked out at it. None of the great buttes were in sight. Perhaps the tragedy which had befallen one of them had driven them from their feeding ground. In the misty, silvery night, I could see no sign of any living thing. Taking courage, therefore, I slipped rapidly across it, and among the jungle on the farther side, I picked up once again the brook which was my guide. It was a cheery companion, gurgling and chuckling as it ran, like the dear old trout stream in the west I fished at night in my boyhood. So long as I followed it down, I must come to the lake, and as I followed it back, I must come to the camp. Often I had to lose sight of it on account of the tangled brushwood, but I was always within earshot of its tinkle and splash. As one descended the slope, the woods became thinner, and bushes, with occasional high trees, took the place of the forest. I could make good progress, therefore, and I could see without being seen. I passed close to the pterodactyl swamp, and as I did so, with a dry, crisp, leathery rattle of wings, one of these great creatures, it was 20 feet at least from tip to tip, rose up from somewhere near me and soared into the air. As it passed across the face of the moon, the light shone clearly through the membranous wings, and it looked like a flying skeleton against the white tropical radiance. I crouched low among the bushes, for I knew from past experience that with a single cry, the creature could bring 100 of its loathsome mates about.
Why is there so much?
It was not until it had settled again that I dared to steal onwards upon my journey. The night had been exceedingly still, but as I advanced, I became conscious of a low, rumbling sound, a continuous murmur somewhere in front of me. This grew louder as I proceeded, until at last it was clearly quite close to me. When I stood still, the sound was constant, so that it seemed to come from some stationary cause. It was like a boiling kettle or the bubbling of a small great pot. Soon I came upon the source of it, for in the center of a small clearing I found a lake, or a pool rather, for it was not larger than the basin of a Trafalgar Square fountain, of some black pitch-like stuff, the surface of which rose and fell in great blisters of bursting gas. The air above it was shimmering with heat, and the ground round was so hot that I could hardly bear to lay my hand on it. It was clear that the great volcanic outburst which had raised this strange plateau so many years ago had not yet entirely spent its forces. Blackened rocks and mounds of lava I had already seen everywhere peeping out from amid the luxuriant vegetation which draped.
Good God, please, for the love of all things holy.
Was the first sign that we had of actual existing activity on the slopes of the ancient crater.
No.
I had no time to examine it further, for I had need to hurry if I were to be back in camp in the morning. It was a fearsome walk, and one which will be with me so long as memory holds. In the great moonlight clearings, I slunk along among the shadows on the margin. In the jungle I crept forward, stopping with a beating heart whenever I heard, as I often did, the crash of breaking branches as some wild beast went past. Now and then, great shadows loomed up for an instant and were gone, great silent shadows, which seemed to prowl upon padded feet. How often I stopped with the intention of returning, and yet every time my pride conquered my fear, set me on again till my object should be attained. At last, my watch showed that it was 1 in the morning. I saw the gleam of water amid the openings of the jungle, and 10 minutes later I was among the reeds upon the borders of the central lake. I was exceedingly dry, so I lay down and took a long draught of its waters, which were fresh and cold. There was a broad pathway with many tracks upon it at the spot which I had found, so that it was clearly one of the drinking places of the animals. Close to the water's edge there was a huge isolated block of lava. Up this I climbed, and lying on the top I had an excellent view in every direction. The first thing which I saw filled me with amazement. When I described the view from the summit of the great tree, I said that on the farther cliff I could see a number of dark spots which appeared to be the mouths of caves. Now, as I looked out at the same cliffs, I saw discs of light in every direction, ruddy, clearly defined patches, like the portholes of a liner in the darkness. For a moment, I thought it was the lava glow from some volcanic action, but this could not be so. Any volcanic action would surely be down in the hollow, and not high among the rocks. What, then, was the alternative? It was wonderful, and yet it must surely be. These ruddy spots must be the reflection of fires within the caves, fires which can only be lit by the hand of man. There were human beings there upon the plateau. How gloriously my ex testified. Here was news indeed for us to bear back with us to London. For a long time I lay and watched these red quivering flutters of light. I suppose they were 10 miles off from me, yet even at that distance one could observe how, from time to time, they twinkled or were obscured as someone passed before them. What would I not have given to be able to crawl up to peep in, and to take back some word to my comrades as to the appearance and character of the race who lived in so strange a place? It was out of the question for the moment, and yet surely we could not leave the plateau until we had some definite knowledge upon the point. Lake Gladys, my own lake, like a sheet of Windsor before me. Shallow, for in many places I saw low sandbanks perched above the water. Everywhere upon its dim surface I could see signs of life, sometimes mere rings and ripples in the water, sometimes the gleam of great silver-sided fish in the air, sometimes the arched, slate-covered back of some passing monster. Upon a yellow sandbank I saw a creature like a huge swan, with a clumsy body and a high, flexible neck, shuffling about upon the margin. Presently it plunged in, and for some time I could see the arched neck and darting head undulating above the water. Then it dived, and I saw it no more. My attention was soon drawn away from these distant sights, and brought back to what was going on at my very feet.
Why?
And were squatting at the edge of the river, their long, flexible tongues like red ribbons shooting in and out as they laughed. A huge deer with branching horns, a magnificent creature which carried itself like a king, came down with its doe and 2 fawns, and drank beside the armadillos. No such deer exists anywhere else upon the earth, for the moose or elks which I have seen would hardly have reached its shoulders. Presently it gave a warning snort, and was off with its family among the reeds, while the armadillos also scuttled for shelter. A newcomer, a most monstrous animal, was coming down the path. For a moment, I wondered where I could have seen that ungainly shape, that arched back with triangular fringes along it, that strange bird-like head held close to the ground. Then it came back.
Good.
It was the Stegosaurus, the very creature which White had preserved in his sketchbook, and which had been the first object which arrested the attention of Challenger. There he was, perhaps the very specimen which the American artist had encountered. The ground shook beneath his tremendous weight, and his gulpings of water resounded through the still night. For 5 minutes it was so close to my rock that by stretching out my hand I could have touched the hideous waving ankles upon his back. Then he lumbered away and was lost among the boulders. Looking at my watch, I saw that it was 2:30, and high tide, therefore, that I started upon my homeward journey. There was no difficulty about the direction in which I should return, for all along I had kept the little brook upon my left, and it opened into the central lake within a stone's throw of the boulder upon which I had been lying. I set on, therefore, in high spirits, for I felt that I had done good work, and was bringing back a fine budget of news for my companions. Foremost of all, of course, were the sight of the fiery caves, and the certainty that some troglodytic race inhabited them. But besides that, I could speak from experience of the central lake. I could testify that it was full of strange creatures, and I had seen several landforms of primeval life which we had not before encountered. I reflected as I walked that few men in the world could have spent a stranger night, or added more to human knowledge in the course of it. I was plodding up the slope, turning these thoughts over in my mind, and had reached a point which may have been halfway to home, when my mind was brought back to my own position by a strange noise behind me. It was something between a snore and a growl, low, deep, and exceedingly menacing. Some strange creature was evidently near me, but nothing could be seen, so I hastened more rapidly upon my way. I had traversed half a mile or so, when suddenly the sound was repeated, still behind me, but louder and more menacing than before. My heart stood still within me as it flashed across me that the beast, whatever it was, must surely be after me. My skin grew cold, and my hair rose at the thought. That these monsters should tear each other to pieces was a part of the strange struggle for existence. But that they should turn upon modern man, that they should deliberately track and hunt down the predominant human, was a staggering and fearsome thought. I remembered again the blood-beslobbered face which we had seen in the glare of Lord John's torch, like some horrible vision from the deepest circle of Dante's hell. With my knees shaking beneath me, I stood and glared with starting eyes down the moonlit path which lay behind me. All was quiet as in a dream landscape, silver clearings and the black patches of the bushes. Nothing else could I see. Then, from out of the silence, imminent and threatening, there came once more that low, throaty croaking, far louder and closer than before. There could no longer be a doubt. Something was on my trail, and was closing in upon me every minute. I stood like a man paralyzed, still staring at the ground which I had traversed. Then, suddenly, I saw it. There was a movement among the bushes at the far end of the clearing which I had just traversed. A great dark shadow disengaged itself and hopped out into the clear moonlight. I say hopped advisedly, for the beast moved like a kangaroo, springing along in an erect position upon its powerful hind legs, while its front ones were held bent in front of it. It was of enormous size and power, like an erect elephant, but its movements, in spite of its bulk, were exceedingly alert. For a moment, as I saw its shape, I hoped that it was an iguanodon, which I knew to be harmless. But ignorant as I was, I soon saw that this was a very different creature. Instead of the gentle deer-shaped head of the great three-toed heath-eater, this beast had a broad, squat, toad-like face, like that which had alarmed us in our camp. His ferocious cry and the horrible energy of his pursuit both assured me that this was surely one of the great flesh-eating dinosaurs, the most terrible beasts which have ever walked this earth. As the huge brute loped along, it drooped forward upon its forepaws and brought its every 20 yards or so, smelling out my trail. Sometimes, for an instant, it was at fault. Then it would catch it up again and come bounding swiftly along the path I had taken. Even now, when I think of that nightmare, the sweat breaks out upon my brow. What could I do? My useless fowling piece was in my hand. What help could I get from that? I looked desperately round for some rock or tree, but I was in a bushy jungle with nothing higher than a sapling within sight, while I knew that the creature behind me would tear down an ordinary tree as though it were a weed. My only possible chance lay in flight. I could not move swiftly over the rough, broken ground, but as I looked round me in despair, I saw a well-marked, hard-beaten path which ran across in front of me. We had seen several of the sort, the runs of various wild beasts, during our expeditions. Along this I could perhaps hold my own, for I was a fast runner and in excellent condition. Slinging away my useless gun, I set myself to do such a half-mile as I had never done before or since. My limbs ached, my chest heaved. I felt that my throat would burst for want of air. And yet, with that horror behind me, I ran and I ran and I ran. At last I paused, hardly able to move. For a moment I thought that I had thrown him off. The path lay still behind me, and then, suddenly, with a crashing and a rending, a thudding of giant feet and a panting of monster lungs, the beast was upon me once more. He was at my very heels. I was lost. Mad then that I was to linger so long before I fled. Up to that he had hunted by scent, and his movement was slow, but he had actually seen me as I started to run. From then onwards he had hunted by sight, for the path showed him where I had gone. Now, as he came round the curve, he was springing in great bounds. The moonlight shone upon his projecting eyes, the row of enormous teeth in his open mouth, and gleaming fringe of claws upon his short, powerful forearms. With a scream of terror, I turned and rushed wildly down the path. Behind me, the thick, gasping breathing of the creature sounded louder and louder. His heavy footfall was beside me. Every instant I expected to feel his grip upon my back. And then, suddenly, there came a crash. I was falling through space, and everything gone was darkness and rest. As I emerged from my unconsciousness, which could not, I think, have lasted more than a few minutes, I was aware of a most dreadful and penetrating smell. Putting out my hand in the darkness, I came upon something which felt like a huge lump of meat, while my other hand closed upon a large bone. Up above me there was a circle of starlit sky, which showed me that I was lying at the bottom of a deep pit. Slowly I staggered my feet and felt myself all over. I was stiff and sore from head to foot, but there was no limb which would not move, no joint which would not bend. As the circumstances of my falling came back into my confused brain, I looked up in terror, expecting to see that dreadful head silhouetted against the paling sky. There was no sign of the monster, however, nor could I hear any sound from above. I began to walk slowly round, therefore, feeling in every direction to find out what this strange place could be into which I had been so opportunely precipitated. It was, as I have said, a pit, with sharply sloping walls and a level bottom about 20 feet across. This bottom was littered with great gobbets of flesh, most of which was in the last state of putridity. The atmosphere was poisonous and horrible. After tripping and stumbling over these lumps of decay, I came suddenly against something hard, and I found that an upright post was firmly fixed in the center of the hollow. It was so high that I could not reach the top of it with my hand, and it appeared to be covered with grease. Suddenly, I remembered that I had a tin box of wax matches in my pocket. Striking one of them, I was able at last to form some opinion of this place into which I had fallen. There could be no question as to its nature. It was a trap made by the hand of man. The post in the center, some 9 feet long, was sharpened at the upper end. It was black with the stained blood of the creatures who had been impaled upon it. The remains scattered about were fragments of the victims, which had been cut away in order to clear the stake for the next who might blunder in. I remembered that Challenger had declared that man could not exist upon the plateau, since with his feeble weapons he could not hold his own against the monsters who roamed over it. But now it was clear enough how it could be done. In their narrow-mouthed caves, the natives, whoever they might be, had refuges into which the huge saurians could not penetrate, while with their developed brains they were capable of setting such traps, covered with branches, across the paths which marked the run of the animals, as would destroy them in spite of all their strength and activity. Man was always the master. The sloping wall of the pit was not difficult for an active man to climb, but I hesitated long before I trusted myself within reach of the dreadful creature which had so nearly destroyed me. How did I know that he was not lurking in the nearest clump of bushes, waiting for my reappearance? I took part, however, as I recalled a conversation between Challenger and somebody upon the habits of the great saurians. Both were agreed that the monsters were practically brainless, that there was no room for reason in their tiny cranial cavities, and that if they had disappeared from the rest of the world, it was assuredly on account of their own stupidity, which made it impossible for them to adapt themselves to changing conditions. To lie in wait for me now would mean that the creature had appreciated what had happened to me, and this, in turn, would argue some power connecting cause and effect. Surely it was more likely that a brainless creature, acting solely by vague predatory instinct, would give up the chase when I disappeared, and, after a pause of astonishment, would wander away in search of some other prey. I clambered to the edge of the pit and looked over. The stars were fading, the sky was whitening, and the cold wind of morning blew pleasantly upon my face. I could see or hear nothing of my enemy. Slowly I climbed out and sat for a while upon the ground, ready to spring back into my refuge if any danger should appear. Then, reassured by the absolute stillness and by the growing light, I took my courage in both hands and stole back along the path which I had come. Some distance down it, I picked up my gun, and shortly afterwards struck the brook which was my guide. So, with many a frightened backward glance, I made for home. And suddenly there came something to remind me of my absent companions. In the clear, still morning air there sounded far away the sharp, hard note of a single rifle shot. I paused and listened, but there was nothing more. For a moment I was shocked at the thought that some sudden danger might have befallen them. But then a simpler and more natural explanation came to my mind. It was now broad daylight. No doubt my absence had been noticed. They had imagined that I was lost in the woods and had fired this shot to guide me home. It is true that we had made a strict resolution against firing, but if it seemed to them that I might be in danger, they would not hesitate. It was for me now to hurry on as fast as possible, and so to reassure them. I was weary and spent, so my progress was not so fast as I wished. But at last I came into regions which I knew. There was the swamp of the pterodactyls upon my left. There in front of me was the glade of the iguanodons. Now I was in the last belt of trees which separated me from Fort Challenger. I raised my voice in a cheery shout to allay their fears. No answering greeting came back to me. My heart sank at that ominous stillness. I quickened my pace into a run. The zareba rose before me even as I had left it, but the gates was open. I rushed in. In the cold morning light, it was a fearful sight which met my eyes. Our effects were scattered in wild confusion over the ground. My comrades had disappeared, and close to the smoldering ashes of our fire, the grass was stained crimson with a hideous pool of blood. I was so stunned by this sudden shock that for a time I must have nearly lost my reason. I have a vague recollection, as one remembers a bad dream, of rushing about through the woods all around the empty camp, calling wildly for my companions. No answer came back from the silent shadows. The horrible thought that I might never see them again, that I might find myself abandoned all alone in that dreadful place, with no possible way of descending into the world below, that I might live and die in that nightmare country, drove me to desperation. I could have torn my hair and beaten my head in my despair. Only now did I realize how I had learned to lean upon my companions, upon the serene self-confidence of Challenger, and upon the masterful, humorous coolness of Lord John Roxton. Without them, I was like a child in the dark, helpless and powerless. I did not know which way to turn, or what I should do first. After a period during which I sat in bewilderment, I set myself to try and discover what sudden misfortune could have befallen my companions. The whole disordered appearance of the camp showed that there had been some sort of attack, and the rifle shot no doubt marked the time when it had occurred. That there should have been only one shot showed that it had been all over in an instant. The rifles still lay upon the ground, and one of them, Lord John's, had the empty cartridge in the breech. The blankets of Challenger beside the fire suggested that they had been asleep at the time. The cases of ammunition and of food were scattered about in a wild litter, together with our unfortunate cameras and plate carriers, but none of them were missing. On the other hand, all the exposed provisions, and I remembered that there were a considerable quantity of them, were gone. They were animals then, and not natives, who had made the inroad, for surely the latter would have left nothing behind. But if animals, or some single terrible animal, then what had become of my comrades? A ferocious beast would surely have destroyed them and left their remains. It is true that there was that one hideous pool of blood which told of violence. Such a monster as had pursued me during the night could have carried away a victim as easily as a cat would a mouse. In that case, the others would have followed in pursuit, but then they would assuredly have taken their rifles with them. The more I tried to think it out with my confused and weary brain, the less could I find any plausible explanation. I searched round in the forest, but could see no tracks which could help me to a conclusion. Once I lost myself, and it was only by good luck, and after an hour of wandering, that I found the camp once more. Suddenly, a thought came to me, and brought some little comfort to my heart. I was not absolutely alone in the world. Down at the bottom of the cliff, and within call of me, was waiting the faithful Zambo. I went to the edge of the plateau and looked over. Sure enough, he was squatting among his blankets beside his fire in his little camp. But, to my amazement, a second man was seated in front of him. For an instant my heart leaped for joy, as I thought that one of my comrades had made his way safely down. But a second glance dispelled the hope. The rising sun shone red upon the man's skin. He was an Indian. I shouted loudly and waved my handkerchief. Presently, Zambo looked up, waved his hand, and turned to ascend the pinnacle. In a short time he was standing close to me, and listening with deep distress to the story which I told him. "The devil got them for sure, Master Malone," said he. "You got into the devil's country, sir, and he takes you on himself. You take advice, Master Malone, and come down quick, else we get you as well." "How can I come down, Zambo?" "You get creepers from trees, Master Malone. Throw them over here. I make fast to this stump, and so you have bridge." "We have thought of that. There are no creepers here which could bear us." "Send for ropes, Master Malone." "Who can I send, and where?" "Send to Indian villages, sir. Plenty hide rope in Indian village. Indian down below. Send him." "Who is he?" "He one of our Indians. Other ones beat him and take away his pay. He come back to us, ready now to take letter, bring rope, anything. Ready now to take letter, bring rope, anything." "To take a letter? Why not? Perhaps he might bring help. But in any case, he would ensure that our lives were not spent for nothing, and that news of all that we had won for science should reach our friends at home. I had 2 completed letters already waiting. I would spend the day in writing a third, which would bring my experiences absolutely up to date. The Indian could bear this back to the world. I ordered Sambo, therefore, to come again in the evening, and I spent my miserable and lonely day in recording my own adventures of the night before. I also drew up a note to be given to any white merchant or captain of a steamboat whom the Indian could find, imploring them to see that ropes were sent to us, since our lives must depend upon it. These documents I threw to Sambo in the evening, and also my purse, which contained 3 English sovereigns. They were to be given to the Indian, and he was promised twice as much if he returned with the ropes. So now you will understand, my dear Mr. McCardle, how this communication reaches you, and you will also know the truth, in case you never hear again from your unfortunate correspondent. Tonight I am too weary and too pressed to make any plans. Tomorrow I must think out some way by which I shall keep in touch with this camp, and yet search round for any traces of my unhappy friends. A sight which I shall never forget. Just as the sun was setting upon that melancholy night, I saw the lonely figure of the Indian upon the vast lane beneath me, and I watched him, our one faint hope of salvation, until he disappeared in the rising mists of evening, which lay rose-tinted from the setting sun between the far-off river and me. It was quite dark when I at last turned back to our stricken camp, and my last vision as I went was the red gleam of Sambo's fire, the one point of light, the wide world below, as was his faithful presence in my own shadowed soul.
Come on, come
And
on,
yet,
come
I
on.
felt happier than I had done since this crushing blow had
Please,
fallen upon me.
work,
For it was
work,
good to think that the world should know what
please.
we had done, so that at the worst our names should not perish with our bodies, but should go down to posterity associated with the result of our labors. It was an awesome thing to sleep in that ill-fated camp, and yet it was even more unnerving to do so in the jungle. One or the other it must be. Prudence, on the one hand, warned me that I should remain on guard, but exhausted nature, on the other, declared that I should do nothing of the kind. I climbed up onto a limb of the great ginkgo tree, but there was no secure perch on its rounded surface, and I should have often broken my neck the moment I began to doze. I got down, therefore, and pondered over what I should do. Finally, I closed the door of the zareba, lit 3 separate fires in a triangle, and having eaten a hearty supper, dropped off into a profound sleep, from which I had a strange and most welcome awakening. In the early morning, just as day was breaking, a hand was laid upon my arm, and starting up, with all my nerves in a tingle and my hand feeling for a rifle, I gave a cry of joy, as in the old grey lights I saw Lord John Buxton kneeling beside me. It was he, and yet it was not he. I had left him, calm in his bearing, correct in his person, prim in his dress. Now he was pale and wild-eyed, gasping as he breathed like one who has run far and fast. His gaunt face was scratched and bloody.
Oh my God, why?
And his hat was gone. I stared in amazement, but he gave me no chance for questions. He was grabbing at our stores all the time he spoke. "Quick, young fella, quick!" he cried. "Every moment counts. Get the rifles, both of them. I have the other 2. Now, all the cartridges you can gather. Fill up your pockets. Now with some food. Half a dozen tins will do. That's all right. Don't wait to talk or think. Get a move on, or we are done." Still, half awake and unable to imagine what it all might mean, I found myself hurrying madly after him through the wood, a rifle under each arm and a pile of various stores in my hands. He dodged in and out through the thickest of the scrub until he came to a dense clump of brushwood. Into this he rushed, regardless of thorns, and threw himself into the heart of it, pulling me down by his side. "There," he panted. "I think we are safe here. They'll make for the camp as sure as fate. It will be their first idea. But this should puzzle them." "What is it all?" I asked, when I got my breath. "Where are the professors? And who is it that is after us?" "The 8 men!" he cried. My God, what brutes! Don't raise your voice, for they have long ears, sharp eyes too, and no power of scent, so far as I can judge, so I don't think they can sniff us out. Where have you been, young fella? You were well out of it. In a few sentences I whispered what I had done. Pretty bad, said he, when he heard of the dinosaur at the pit. It isn't quite the place for a rest cure, but I had no idea what its possibilities were until those devils got hold of us. The man-eating Papuans had big ones, but they are Chesterfields compared to this crowd. How did it happen? I asked. It was in the early morning. Our learned friends were just stirring, hadn't even begun to argue yet. Suddenly, it rained apes. They came down as thick as apples out of a tree. They had been assembling in the dark, I suppose, until that great tree over our heads was heavy with them. I shot one of them through the belly, but before we knew where we were, they had us spread eagle on our backs. I called them apes.
What? I swear, I just...
stones in their hands and jabber talked to each other, and ended up tying our hands with creepers. So they are ahead of any beast that I have seen in my wanderings. Ape men, that's what they are, missing things, and I wish they had stayed missing. They carried off their wounded comrade. He was bleeding like a pig, and then they sat around us, and if ever I saw frozen murder, it was in their eyes. They are big fellows, as big as a man and a deal stronger. Curious, classic grey eyes they have under redness, and they just sat and gloated and gloated. Challenger is no chicken, but even he was cowed. He managed to struggle to his feet and yelled out at them to have done with it and get it over. I think he had gone a bit out of his head.
No, why?
For he raged and cursed at them like a lunatic. If they had been a row of his favorite pressmen, he could not have sniped worse. Well, what did they do? I was enthralled by the strange story which my companion was whispering into my ear, while all the time his keen eyes were shooting in every direction.
God dang it, no!
I thought it was the end of us, but instead of that, it started them on a new line. They all jabbered and chatted together. Then one of them stood out beside Challenger. You'll smile, young fella, but upon my word, they might have been kinsmen. I couldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. This old ape-man, he was their chief, was a sort of red Challenger, with every one of our friends' beauty points, only just a trifle more so. He had the short body, the big shoulders, the round chest, no neck, a great ruddy filbert beard, the tufted eyebrows. The what do you want, damn you, look about the eyes, and the whole catalogue. When the ape-man stood by Challenger and put his paw on his shoulder, the thing was complete. Somebody was a bit hysterical, and he laughed till he cried. The ape-man laughed too, or at least they put up the devil of a Catherine, and they set to work to drag us off through the forest. They wouldn't touch the guns and things, thought them dangerous, I expect, but they carried away our loose food. Somebody and I got some rough handling on the way. There's my skin and my toes to prove it. For they took us a beeline through the brambles, and their own hides are like leather. But Challenger was all right. 4 of them carried him shoulder high, and he went like a Roman emperor. What's that? It was a strange clicking noise in the distance, not unlike castanets. There they go, said my companion, slipping cartridges into the second double barrel. Load them all up, young fellow, me lad, for we're not going to be taken alive, and don't you get it. That's the row they make when they are excited. By George, they'll have something to excite them if they put us up. The last stand of the Greys won't be in it. With their rifles grasped in their stiffened hands and a ring of the dead and dying, as some fathead sings. Can you hear them now? Very far away. That little lot will do no good, but I expect their search parties are all over the world. Well, I was telling you my tale of woe. They got us through to this town of theirs, about 1,000 huts and branches and leaves and a great grove of trees near the edge of the cliff. It's 3 or 4 miles from here. The filthy beasts fingered me all over, and I feel as if I should never be clean again. They tied us up, the fellow who had me tied like a post. And there we lay with our toes up beneath a tree, while a great brute stood guard over us with a club in his hand. When I
Just gotta relax.
I mean, old Challenger was up a tree, eating pines and having the time of his life. I'm bound to say that he managed to get some food to us, and with his own hands he loosened our bonds. If you'd seen him sitting up in that tree, hobnobbing with his twin brother, and singing in that low bass of his, ring out wild bells, because music of any kind seemed to put them in a good humor, you'd have smiled. But we weren't in much mood for laughing, as you can guess. They were inclined, within limits, to let him do what he liked. But they drew the line pretty sharply.
Please. I just want to breathe.
It was a mighty consolation to us all to know that you were on a noose and had the archives in your keeping. Well, now, young fella, I'll tell you what will surprise you. You say you saw signs of death, fires, traps, and the like. Well, we have seen the natives themselves. Oh, devils, they were down-faced little chaps and had enough to make them so. It seems that the humans hold one side of this plateau, over yonder where you saw the caves, and the 8 men hold this side, and there is bloody war between them all the time. That's the situation so far as I can follow it. Well, yesterday, the 8 men got hold of a dozen of the humans and brought them in as prisoners. You never heard such a jabbering and shrieking in your life. The men were little red fellows and had been bitten and clawed so they could hardly walk. The 8 men put 2 of them to death there and there, fairly pulled the arm off of one of them.
Good God, why?
Beastly, plucky little chaps they are.
I just want this to work, please.
And even Challenger had as much as he could stand. I think they have cleared, don't you? We listened intently, but nothing save the calling of the birds broke the deep peace of the
Come on, please,
you had at the escape of your life, young fellow lad. It was actually those Indians that put you clean out of their heads, else they would have been back to the camp, sure as fate, and gathered you. Of course, as you said, they have been watching.
It's just so much. It's just like, it's time. It's time. It's time. It's time. It's time.
Well, we had a horrid business afterwards.
If you're happy and you know it. If you're happy and you know it.
You remember the great bristle of sharp games down below where we found the sources of the American? Well, that is just under 8 Town, and it's the jumping-off place of their prisoners. I expect there's heaps of skeletons there if we look for them. They have a sort of clear parade ground on the top, and they make a proper ceremony about it. One by one, the poor devils have to jump. The game is to see whether they are merely dashed to pieces, or whether they get spewed on the cage. They took us out to see it, and the whole tribe lined up on the edge. 4 of the Indians jumped. They slept through it like the was marathon. Now the one there was found that little lucky skeleton with the trees growing in his head. It was horrible, but it was interesting. We were all fascinated to see that, even when we thought it would be our turn next on the screen. Well, it wasn't. They kept 6 of the Indians up for today. That's how I understood it. But I fancy we were to be the star performers of the show. Challenger might get off, but Summerlee and I were in the bill. Their language is more than half signs, and it was not hard to follow them. So I thought it was time we made a break for it. I had been plotting it out a bit, and had 1 or 2 things clear in my mind. It was all on me, for Summerlee was useless, and Challenger not much better. The only time they got together, they got slanging because they couldn't agree upon the scientific classification of these red-headed devils that had got hold of us. One said it was the Dryopithecus of Java. The other said it was the Pithecanthropus. Madness, I call it. Loonies both. I had thought out 1 or 2 points that were helpful. One was that these brutes could not run as fast as a man in the open. They have short, bandy legs, you see, and heavy bodies. Even Challenger could give a few yards in 100 to the best of them, and you or I would be a perfect shrub. Another point was that they knew nothing about guns. I don't believe they ever understood how the fellow I shot came by his hurt. If we could get at our guns, there was no saying what we could do. So I broke away early this morning, gave my guard a kick in the tummy that laid him out, and sprinted for the camp. There I got you and the guns, and here we are. But the professors, I cried in consternation. Well, we must go back and fetch 'em. I couldn't bring 'em with me. Challenger was up the tree, and Summerlee was not fit for the act. The only chance was to get the guns and try a rescue. Of course, they may scupper them at once in revenge. I don't Challenger, but I wouldn't answer for Summerlee. But they would have had him in any case. Of that I am certain. So I haven't made matters any worse by bolting. But we are honor-bound to go back and have them out, or see it through with them. So you can make up your soul, young fellow, my lad, for it will be one way or the other before evening. I have tried to imitate here Lord Broxton's jerky talk, his short, strong sentences, the half-humorous, half-reckless tone that ran through it all. But he was a born leader. As danger thickened, his jaunty manner would increase, his speech became more racy, his cold eyes glitter into ardent life, and his Don Quixote mustache bristle with joyous excitement. His love of danger, his intense appreciation of the drama of an adventure, all the more intense for being held tightly in, his consistent view that every peril in life is a form of sport, a fierce game betwixt you and fate, with death as a forfeit, made him a wonderful companion at such hours. If it were not for our fears as to the fate of our companions, it would have been a positive joy to throw myself with such a man into such an affair. We were rising from our brushwood hiding place when suddenly I felt his grip upon my arm.
Okay.
By George! Here they come. From where we lay, we could look down a broad aisle, arched with green, formed by the trunks and branches. Along this, a party of the 8 men were passing. They went in single file, with bent legs and rounded backs, their hands occasionally touching the away from the knife, but 5 feet or so, with long arms and enormous chests. Many of them carried sticks, and at the distance they looked like a line of very hairy and deformed human beings. For a moment I caught this clear glimpse of them. Then they were lost among the bushes. Not this time, said Lord John, who had caught up his rifle. Our best chance is to lie quiet until they have given up the search. Then we shall see whether we can't get back to their town and hit them where it hurts most. Give them an hour, and we'll march. We filled in the time by opening one of our food tins and making sure of our breakfast. Lord Broxton had had nothing but some fruit since the morning before, and ate like a starving man. Then, at last, our pockets bulging with cartridges and a...
Give me a shout out, please. Joe Sigma 122. I shout you. Please, just work.
We slunk through the bushes in silence until we came to the very edge of the cliff, close to the old cabin. There we halted, and Lord John gave me some idea of his plans. So long as we are among the thick trees, these swine are our masters, said he. They can see us, we cannot see them. But in the open, it is different. There we can move faster than they, so we must stick to the open all we can. The edge of the plateau has fewer large trees than further inland, so that's our line of advance. Go slowly. Keep your eyes open and your rifle ready. Above all, never let them get you prisoner while there is a cartridge left. That's my last word to you, young fellow. When we reached the edge of the cliff, I looked over and saw a good old black Zambo sitting smoking on a rock below us. I would have given a great deal to have aimed him and told him how we were placed, but it was too dangerous lest we should be heard. The woods seemed to be full of him. Again and again we heard their curious clicking chatter. At such times we plunged into the nearest hollow bushes and lay still until the sound passed away. Our advance, therefore, was very slow, and 2 hours at least must have passed before I saw, by Lord John's cautious movements, that we must be close to our destination. He motioned to me to lie still. He crawled forward himself. In a minute he was back again, his face quivering with eagerness. "Come," said he, "come quick! We are late already." I found myself shaking with nervous excitement as I sprang down beside him, looking out through the bushes at a clearing stretched before us. It was a sight which I shall never forget until my dying day, so weird, so impossible, that I do not know how I am to make you realize it, or how in a few years I shall bring myself to believe in it, if I live to sit once more on a lounge in the Savage Club and look out at the grand solidity of the embankment. I know that it will seem then to be some wild nightmare, some delirium of fever. Yet I will set it down now, while it is still fresh in my memory, and one, at least, the man who lay in the damp grasses by my side, will know if I have lied. A wide open space lay before us, some hundreds of yards across, all green turf and low bracken growing to the very edge of the cliff. Round this clearing there was a semicircle of trees with curious huts built of foliage piled one above the other among the branches. A rookery of every nest a little house would best convey the idea. The openings of these huts and the branches of the trees were thronged with a dense mob of people, who, from their size, I took to be the females and infants of the tribe. They formed the background of the picture, and were all looking out with eager interest at the same scene which fascinated and bewildered us. In the open, and near the edge of the cliff, there had assembled a crowd of some 100 of these shaggy red-haired creatures, many of them of immense size, and all of them horrible to look upon. There was a certain discipline among them, for none of them attempted to break the line which had been formed. In front there stood a small group of Indians, little, clean-limbed red fellows, whose skins glowed like polished bronze in the strong sunlight. A tall, thin white man was standing beside them, his head bowed, his arms folded, his whole attitude expressive of his horror and dejection. There was no mistaking the angular form of Professor Sullivan. In front of and around this dejected group of prisoners were several Englishmen who watched them closely and made all escape impossible. Then, high out from all the others and close to the edge of the cliff, were 2 figures so strange and under other circumstances so ludicrous that they absorbed my attention. The one was our comrade, Professor Challenger. The remains of his coat still hung in strips from his shoulders, and his shirt had been all torn out, and his great beard merged itself in the black tangle which covered his mighty chest. He had lost...
It would be a great idea if I lost the weight, we did a music video where we film myself every day walking the same.
Constitution for the United States of America. Play.
His hat and his hair, which had grown long in our wanderings, was flying in wild disorder. A single day seemed to have changed him from the highest product of modern civilization to the most desperate savage in South America. Beside him stood his master, the king of the great men. In all things he was, as Lord John had said, the very image of our professor, save that his coloring was red instead of black. The same short, broad figure, the same heavy shoulders, the same forward hanging of the arms, the same bristling beard merging itself in the hairy chest. Only above the eyebrows, where the sloping forehead and low cornerstone of the ape man were in sharp contrast to the broad brow and magnificent cranium of the European, could one see any marked difference. At every other point, the king was an absurd parody of the professor. All this, which takes me so long to describe, impressed itself upon me in a few seconds. Then we had very different things to think of, for an active drama was in progress. Two of the ape men had seized one of the Indians out of the group, dragged him forward to the edge of the cliff. The king raised his hand as a signal. They caught the man by his leg and arm and swung him 3 times backwards and forwards with tremendous violence. Then, with a frightful heave, they shot the poor wretch over the precipice. With such force did they throw him that he curved high in the air before beginning to drop. As he vanished from sight, the whole assembly, except the guards, rushed forward to the edge of the precipice, and there was a long pause of absolute silence, broken by a mad yell of delight. They sprang about, tossing their long hairy arms in the air and howling with exultation. Then they fell back from the edge, formed themselves again into a line, and waited for the next victim. This time it was Summerlee. 2 of his guards caught him by the wrists and pulled him brutally to the front. His thin figure and long limbs struck, fluttered like a chicken being dragged from a coop. Challenger had turned to the king and waved his hands frantically before him. He was begging, pleading, imploring for his comrade's life. The ape-man pushed him roughly aside and shook his head. It was the last conscious movement he was to make upon earth. Lord John's rifle cracked, and the king sank down, a tangled red sprawling thing, upon the ground. "Shoot into the thick of them! Shoot, sonny! Shoot!" cried my companion. There are strange red depths in the soul of the most commonplace man. I am tender-hearted by nature, and I found my eyes moist many a time over the scream of a wounded hare. Yet the bloodlust was on me now. I found myself on my feet, emptying one magazine then the other, clicking open the breech to reload, snapping it to again, while cheering and yelling with pure ferocity and joy of slaughter as I did so. With our 4 guns, the 2 of us made a horrible havoc. Both the guards who held Summerlee were down, and he was staggering about like a drunken man in his amazement, unable to realize that he was a free man. The dense mob of 8 men ran about in bewilderment, marveling whence this storm of death was coming, or what it might mean. They waved, gesticulated, screamed, and tripped over those who had fallen. Then, with a sudden impulse, they all rushed in a howling crowd to the trees for shelter, leaving the ground behind them spotted with their stricken comrades. The prisoners were left for the moment standing alone in the middle of the clearing. Challenger's blade had grasped the situation. He seized the bewildered Summerlee by the arm, and they both ran towards us. 2 of the guards bounded after them and fell to 2 bullets from Lord John. We ran forward into the open to meet our friends and pressed a loaded rifle into the hands of each. But Summerlee was at the end of his strength. He could hardly totter. Already the 8 men were recovering from their panic. They were coming through the brushwood and threatening to cut us off. Challenger and I ran Summerlee along, one at each of his elbows, while Lord John covered our retreat, firing again and again as savage heads snarled at us out of the bushes. For a mile or more, the chattering brutes were at our very heels. Then the pursuit slackened, for they learned our power and would no longer face that unhurried rifle. When we had at last reached the camp, we looked back and found ourselves alone. So it seemed to us, and yet we were mistaken. We had hardly closed the thorn-bush door of our zareba, clasped each other's hands, and thrown ourselves panting upon the ground beside our spring, when we heard a patter of feet, and then a gentle plaintive cry from outside our entrance. Lord Buxton rushed forward, rifle in hand, and threw it open. There, prostrate upon their faces, lay the little red figures of the 4 surviving Indians, trembling with fear of us, and yet imploring our protection. With an expressive sweep of his hands, one of them pointed to the woods around them, and indicated that they were full of danger. Then, darting forward, he threw his arms round Lord John's legs, and rested his face upon them. "By George!" cried our peer, pulling at his mustache in great perplexity. "I say, what the deuce are we to do with these people? Get up, little chappie, and take your face off my boots." Summerlee was sitting up, stuffing some tobacco into his old briar. "We've got to see them safe," said he. "You've pulled us all out of the jaws of death. My word, it was a good bit of work." "Admirable!" cried Challenger. "Admirable! Not only we as individuals, but European science collectively owe you a deep debt of gratitude for what you have done. I do not hesitate to say that the disappearance of Professor Summerlee and myself would have left an appreciable gap in modern zoological history. Our young friend here and you have done most excellently well." He beamed at us with the old paternal smile. But European science would have been somewhat amazed could they have seen their chosen child, the hope of the future, with his tangled, unkempt hair, his bare chest, and his tattered clothes. He had one of the meat tins between his knees, and sat with a large piece of cold Australian mutton between his fingers. The Indian looked up at him, and then, with a little yelp, cringed to the ground, clung to Lord John's leg. "Don't you be scared, my bunny boy," said Lord John, patting the matted head in front of him. "He can't speak your appearance, stranger, and by George, I don't. All right, little chap, he's only a human, just the same as the rest of us." "Really, sir?" cried the professor. "Well, it's lucky for you, Challenger, that you are a little bit out of the ordinary. If you hadn't been so like the king, upon my word, Lord John, you allow yourself great latitude. Well, it's a fact. I desire that you would change the subject. Your remarks are irrelevant and unintelligent. The question before us is what we are to do with these Indians. The obvious thing is to escort them home, if we do by their own bonds. "There is no difficulty about that," said I. "They live in the caves on the other side of the central lake. Our young friend here knows where they live. I gather it is some distance." "Oh, a good 20 miles, said I. Somebody gave a grunt. "I, for one, could never get back. Surely, I hear those brutes still howling upon our track." As we spoke, from the dark recesses of the woods, we heard far away the jabbering cry of the ape-man. The Indians once more set up a feeble wail of fear. "We must move, and move quick," said Lord John. "You'll help somebody, young fellow. These Indians will carry stores. Now then, come along before they can see us." In less than half an hour, we had reached our brushwood retreat and concealed ourselves. All day we heard the excited calling of the ape-men in the direction of our old camp, but none of them came our way. The tired fugitives, red and white, had a long, deep sleep. I was dozing myself in the evening when something plucked my sleeve, and I found the Challenger kneeling beside me. "You keep a diary of these events, and you expect eventually to publish it, Mr. Monroe," said he with solemnity. "I am only here as a press reporter," I answered. "Exactly. You may have heard some rather fatuous remarks of Lord John Roxton's, which seemed to imply that there was some resemblance." "Yes, I heard them. I need not say that any publicity given to such an idea, any levity in your narrative of what occurred, would be exceedingly offensive. Lord John's observations are frequently exceedingly offensive, and he is capable of attributing the most absurd reasons for the respect which is always shown by the most undeveloped races to dignity and character. You follow my view? Entirely. I leave the matter to your discretion." Then, after a great pause, he added, "The king of the ape-men was really a creature of great distinction, a most remarkably handsome and intelligent personality. Did it not strike you?" "A most remarkable creature," said I. And the professor, much eased in his mind, settled down to his slumber once more. Those were the real contrasts. We had imagined that our pursuers, the ape-men, knew nothing of our brushwood hiding place, but we were soon to find out our mistake. There was no sound in the woods, not a leaf moved upon the trees, all was peace around us. But we should have been warned by our experience how cunningly and how patiently these creatures can watch and wait until their chance comes. Whenever fate may be mine through life, I am very sure that I shall never be nearer death than I was that morning. But I will tell you the thing in its due order. We all awoke exhausted after the terrific emotions and scanty food of yesterday. Somebody was still so weak that it was an effort for him to stand. But the old man was full of a sort of surly courage which would never admit defeat. A council was held, and it was agreed that we should wait an hour or two where we were, have our much-needed breakfast, and then make our way across the plateau and round the central lake to the caves where our observations had shown that the Indians lived. We relied upon the fact that we could count upon the good word of those whom we had rescued to ensure a warm welcome from their fellows. Then, with our mission accomplished, and possessing a fuller knowledge of the secrets of Maple White Land, we should turn our whole thoughts to the vital problem of our escape and return. Even Challenger was ready to admit that we should then have done all for which we had come, and that our first duty from that time onwards was to carry back to civilization the amazing discoveries we had made. We were able now to take a more leisurely view of the Indians whom we had rescued. They were small men, wiry, active, and well-built, with light black hair tied up in the bunch behind their heads with a leathern thong, and leathern also with their loincloths. Their faces were hairless, well-formed, and good-humored. The lobes of their ears, hanging ragged and bloody, showed that they had been pierced for some ornaments which their captors had torn out. Their speech, though unintelligible to us, was fluent among themselves, and as they pointed to each other and uttered the word Akama many times over, we gathered that this was the name of the nation. Occasionally, with faces which were convulsed with fear and hatred, they shook their clenched hands at the woods round and cried, "Duda, Duda," which was surely their term for their enemies. "What do you make of them, Challenger?" said Lord John. "One thing is very clear to me, and that it is that the little chap with the front of his head shaved is our chief among them." It was indeed evident that this man stood apart from the others, and that they never ventured to address him without every sign of deep respect. He seemed to be youngest of them all, and yet so proud and high was his spirit that upon Challenger laying his great hand upon his head, he started like a spurred horse, and with a quick flash of his dark eyes moved further away from the professor. Then, placing his hand upon his breast, holding himself with great dignity, he uttered the word "Maritas" several times. The professor, unabashed, seized the nearest Indian by the shoulder and proceeded to lecture upon him as if he were a potted specimen in a classroom. "The type of these people," said he in his sonorous fashion, "whether judged by cranial capacity, facial angle, or any other test, cannot be regarded as a low one. On the contrary, we must place it as considerably higher in the scale than many South American tribes which I could mention. On no possible supposition can we explain the evolution of such a race in this place. For that matter, so great a gap separates these 8 men from the primitive animals that have survived upon this plateau, that it is inadmissible to think that they could have developed where we find them." "Then where the deuce do they come from?" asked Lord John. "A question which will no doubt be eagerly discussed in every scientific society in Europe and America," the professor answered. "My own reading of the situation, for what it is worth," he inflated his chest enormously and looked insolently around him at the words, "is that evolution has advanced under the peculiar conditions of this country up to the vertebrate stage, the old types surviving and living on in company with the new ones. Thus, we find such modern creatures as the tapir, an animal with quite a respectable length of pedigree, the great deer, and the anteater in the companionship of reptilian forms of Jurassic type. So much is clear. And now come the 8 men and the Indian. What is the scientific mind to think of their presence? I can only account for it by an invasion from outside. It is probable that there existed an anthropoid ape in South America, who in past ages found his way to this place, and that he developed into the creatures we have seen, some of which," here he looked hard at me, "were of an appearance and shape which, if it had been accompanied by corresponding intelligence, would, I do not hesitate to say, have reflected credit upon any living race. As to the Indians, I cannot doubt that they are more immigrants from below. Under the stress of famine or of conquest, they have made their way up here. Faced by ferocious creatures which they had never before seen, they took refuge in the caves which our young friend has described. But they have no doubt had a bitter fight to hold their own against wild beasts, and especially against the ape-men, who would regard them as intruders and wage a merciless war upon them with a cunning which larger beasts would lack. Hence, the fact that their numbers appear to be limited. Well, gentlemen, have I read you the riddle outright, or is there any point which you would vary? Professor Summerlee for once was too depressed to argue, though he shook his head violently as a token of general disagreement. Lord John merely scratched his scanty locks with the remark that he couldn't put up a fight as he wasn't in the same weight or class. For my own part, I performed my usual role of bringing things down to a strictly prosaic and practical level by the remark that one of the Indians was missing. "He has gone to fetch some water," said Lord Roxton. "We fitted him up with an empty beef tin, and he is off." "To the old camp?" I asked. "No, to the brook. It's among the trees there. It can't be more than a couple of 100 yards. But the beggar is certainly taking his time." "I'll go and look after him," said I. I picked up my rifle and strolled in the direction of the brook, leaving my friends to lay out the scanty breakfast. It may seem to you rash that even for so short a distance I should quit the shelter of our friendly thicket. But you will remember that we were many miles from Ape Town, that so far as we knew the creatures had not discovered our retreat, and that in any case, with a rifle in my hands, I had no fear of them. I had not yet learned their cunning or their strength. I could hear the murmur of our brook somewhere ahead of me, but there was a tangle of trees and brushwood between me and it. I was making my way through this at a point which was just out of sight of my companions, when, under one of the trees, I noticed something red huddled among the bushes. As I approached it, I was shocked to see that it was the dead body of the missing Indian. He lay upon his side, his limbs...
All right. Come on. fucking, why is this? Oh yeah, I see why that's there. I need that, don't I? Okay. Come on. That's the thing of it is. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. Bing bong. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing of it is. That is the thing of it. That is the thing it is.
And his head screwed round at a most unnatural angle, so that he seemed to be looking straight over his own shoulder. I gave a cry to warn my friends that something was amiss, and running forwards, I stooped over the body. Surely my guardian angel was very near me then, for some instinct of fear, or it may have been some faint rustle of leaves, made me glance upwards. Out of the thick green foliage which hung low over my head, two long, muscular arms covered with reddish hair were slowly descending. Another instant, and the great stealthy hands would have been round my throat. I sprang backwards, but quick as I was, those hands were quicker still. Through my sudden spring, they missed the fatal grip, but one of them caught the back of my neck, and the other one my face. I threw my hands up to protect my throat, and the next moment the huge paw had slapped my face and closed over them. I was lifted lightly from the ground, and I felt an intolerable pressure forcing my head back and back, until the strain upon the serpent's spine was more than I could bear. My senses swam, but I still tore at the hand and forced it out from my chin. Looking up, I saw a frightful face with cold, inexorable light blue eyes looking down into mine. There was something hypnotic in those terrible eyes. I could struggle no longer. As the creature felt me grow limp in his grasp, two white canines gleamed for a moment at each side of the vile mouth, and the grip tightened still more upon my chin, forcing it always upwards and back. A thin, oval-tinted mist formed before my eyes, and little silvery bells tinkled in my ears. Dully and far off, I heard the crack of a rifle, and was feebly aware of the shock as I was dropped to the earth, where I lay without sense or motion. I awoke to find myself on my back upon the grass in our lair within the thicket. Someone had brought the water from the brook, and Lord John was sprinkling my head with it, while Challenger and somebody were propping me up with concern in their faces. For a moment, I had a glimpse of the human spirits behind their scientific masks. It was aching head and stiff neck. I was sitting up and ready for anything. "But you've had the escape of your life, young fellow, my lad," said Lord Roxton. "When I heard your cry and ran forward and saw your head twisted half off and your stowwassers kicking in the air, I thought we were one short. Missed the beast in my flurry, but he dropped you all right and was off like a streak. By George, I wish I had 50 men with rifles. I'd clear out the whole infernal gang of them and leave this country a bit cleaner than we found it." It was clear now that the 8 men had in some way marked us down, and that we were watched on every side. We had not so much to fear from them during the day, but they would be very likely to rush us by night, so the sooner we got away from their neighborhood, the better. On 3 sides of us was absolute forest, and there we might find ourselves in an ambush. But on the 4th side, that which sloped down in the direction of the lake, there was only low scrub, with scattered trees and occasional open glades. It was, in fact, the route which I had myself taken in my solitary journey, and it led us straight for the Indian caves. This then must forever fair supply of cartridges and all our guns. So, for a time at least, we could look after ourselves, and we hoped soon to have a chance of returning and restoring our communications with our Negro. He had faithfully promised to stay where he was, and we had not a doubt that he would be as good as his word. It was in the early afternoon that we started upon our journey. The young chief walked at our head as our guide, but refused indignantly to carry any burden. Behind him came the 2 surviving Indians with our scanty possessions upon their backs. We 4 white men walked in the rear with rifles loaded and ready. As we started, there broke from the thick, silent woods behind us a sudden great ululation of the 8 men, which may have been a cheer of triumph at our departure or a jeer of contempt at our flight. Looking back, we heard Rose and his pictures in the pink radiance of the tinted lights. And was this the imposing professor who had swelled behind the great desk in his massive study at Menlo Park? And finally, could this be the astute and prim figure which had risen before the meeting at the Zoological Institute? No 3 tramps that one could have met in a Surrey lane could have looked more hopeless and bedraggled. We had, it is true, been only a week or so upon the top of the plateau, but all our spare clothing was in our camp below, and the 1 week had been a severe one upon us all, though least to me, who had not to endure the handling of the 8 men. My 3 friends had all lost their hats, and had now bound handkerchiefs on their heads. Their clothes hung in ribbons about them, and their unshaven, grimy faces were hardly to be recognized. Both Summerlee and Challenger were limping heavily, while I still dragged my feet from weakness after the shock of the morning, and my neck was as stiff as a board from the murderous grip that held it. We were indeed a sorry crew, and I did not wonder to see our Indian companions with horror and amazement on their faces. In the late afternoon, we reached the lake, and as we emerged from the bush and saw the sheet of water stretching before us, our native friends set up a shrill cry of joy and pointed eagerly in front of them. It was indeed a wonderful sight which lay before us. Sweeping over the glassy surface was a great flotilla of canoes coming straight for the shore upon which we stood. They were some miles out when we first saw them, but they shot forward with great swiftness, and were soon so near that the rowers could distinguish our persons. Instantly, a thunderous shout of delight burst upon them, and we saw them rise from their seats, waving their paddles and spears madly in the air. Then, bending his shoulders, ran forward and embraced most tenderly the youth whom we had saved. He then looked at us and asked some questions, after which he stepped up with much dignity and embraced some of our more advanced Europeans. Strange how correct are the instincts of the natural man, instincts of the natural man. It was clear that the natives had come about upon the warpath, for every man carried his spear, a long bamboo tipped with bone, his bow and arrows, and some sort of club or stone battle axe slung at his side. Their dark, angry glances at the woods from which we had come and the frequent repetition of the word Doyle made it clear enough that this was a rescue party who had set forth to save or revenge the old chief's son, for such we gathered that the youth must be. A council was now by the whole tribe, whilst we sat near on a slab of basins and watched their proceedings. 2 or 3 warriors spoke, and finally our young friend made a spirited harangue with such eloquent features and gestures that we could understand it all as clearly as if we had known his language. "What is the use of returning?" he said. "Sooner or later the thing must be done. Your comrades have been murdered. What if I return safe? These others have been done to death. There is no safety for any of us. We are assembled now and ready." Then he pointed to us. "These strange men are our friends. They are great fighters, and they hate the 8 men even as we do. They command," here he pointed up to heaven, "the thunder and the lightning. When shall we have such a chance again? Let us go forward, and either die now or live for the future in safety. How else shall we go back unashamed to our women?" The little red warriors hung upon the words of the speaker, and when he had finished, they burst into a roar of applause, waving their rude weapons in the air. The old chief stepped forward to us and asked us some questions, pointing at the same time to the woods. Lord John made a sign to him that he should wait for an answer, and then he turned to us. "Well, it's up to you to say what we will do," said he. "My part, I have a score to settle with these monkey folk, and if it ends by wiping them off the face of the earth, I don't see that the earth need fret about it. I'm going with our little red pals, and I mean to see them through the scrap. What do you say, young fella?" "Of course I will come." "And you, Challenger?" "I will assuredly cooperate." "And you, Summerlin?" "We seem to be drifting very far from the object of this expedition, Lord John. I assure you that I little thought when I left my professional chair in London that it was for the purpose of heading a raid of savages upon a colony of anthropoid apes. To such base uses do we come," said Lord John, smiling. "But we are up against it. So what's the decision?" "It seems a most questionable step," said Summerlee, argumentative to the last. "But if you are all going, I hardly see how I can remain behind." "Then it is settled," said Lord John, and turning to the chief, he nodded and slapped his rifle. The old fellow clasped our hands, each in turn, while his men cheered louder than ever. It was too late to advance that night, so the Indians settled down into a rude bivouac. On all sides their flares began to glimmer and smoke. Some of them, who had disappeared into the jungle, came back present, and it was only when we saw one of them the air of an oath and give his consent to the beast's slaughter that we understood at last that these little creatures were as much private property as a herd of cattle, and that these symbols, which had so perplexed us, were nothing more than the marks of the owner. Helpless, torpid, and vegetarian, with great limbs but a minute brain, they could be rounded up and driven by a child. In a few minutes, the huge beast had been cut up, and slabs of him were hanging over a dozen campfires, together with great scaly ganoid fish, which had been speared in the lake. Somebody had laid down and slept upon the sand, but we others roamed round the edge of the water, seeking to learn something more of this strange country. Twice we found pits of blue clay, such as we had already seen in the swamp of eternal darkness. These were old volcanic vents, and for some reason excited the greatest interest in Lord John. What attracted Challenger, on the other hand, was a bubbling, gurgling mud geyser, where some strange gas formed great bursting bubbles upon the surface. He thrust a hollow reed into it, and cried out with delight, like a schoolboy, that he was able, on touching it with a lighted match, to cause a sharp explosion and a blue flame at the far end of the tube. Still more pleased was he when, inverting the leathern pouch over the end of the reed, and so filling it with the gas, he was able to send it soaring up into the air. An inflammable gas, and one markedly lighter than the atmosphere. I should say, beyond doubt, that it contained a considerable proportion of free hydrogen. The resources of GEC are not yet exhausted, my young friend. I may yet show you how a great mind molds all nature to its use. He swelled with some secret purpose, but would say no more. There was nothing which we could see upon the shore which seemed to me so wonderful as the great sheet of water before us. Our numbers and our noise had frightened all living creatures away, and save for a few pterodactyls, which soared round high above our heads while they waited for the carrion, all was still around the camp. But it was different down upon the rose-tinted waters of the central lake. It boiled and heaved with strange life. Great slate-colored backs and high serrated dorsal feet shot up with a fringe of silver, and then rolled down into the depths again. The sandbanks far out were spotted with uncouth crawling forms, huge turtles, strange saurians, and one great flat creature, like a writhing, palpitating mat of black, greasy leather, which flopped its way slowly to the lake. Here and there, high serpent heads projected out of the water, cutting swiftly through it with a little collar of foam in front and a long, swirling wake behind, rising and falling in graceful, swan-like undulations as they went. It was not until one of these creatures wriggled onto a sandbank within a few hundred yards of us and exposed a barrel-shaped body and huge flippers behind the long serpent neck that Challenger and somebody who had joined us broke out into their duet of wonder and admiration. "Plesiosaurus! A freshwater plesiosaurus!" cried somebody. "That I should have lived to see such a sight! We are blessed, my dear Challenger, above all zoologists since the world began." It was not until the night had fallen and the fires of our savage allies glowed red in the shadows that our two men of science could be dragged away from the fascinations of that primeval lake. Even in the darkness, as we lay upon the strand, we heard from time to time the short and plunge of the huge creatures who lived therein. At earliest dawn our camp was astir, and an hour later we had started upon our memorable expedition. Often in my dreams have I thought that I might live to be a war correspondent. In what wildest one could I have conceived the nature of the campaign which it should be my lot to report? Here, then, is my first dispatch from a field of battle. Our numbers have been reinforced during the night by a fresh batch of natives from the caves, and we may have been 400 or 500 strong when we made our advance. A fringe of scouts was thrown out in front, and behind them the whole force in a solid column made their way up the long slope of the bush country until we were near the edge of the forest. Here they spread out into a long straggling line of spearmen and bowmen. Ralston and somebody took their position upon the right flank, while Challenger and I were on the left. It was a host of the Stone Age that we were accompanying to battle. We, with the last word of the gunsmith's art from St. James Street and the Strand. We had not long to wait for our enemy. A wild, shrill clamor rose from the edge of the wood, and suddenly a body of ape-men rushed out with clubs and stones and made for the center of the Indian line. It was a valiant move, but a foolish one, for the great bandy-legged creatures were slow of foot, while their opponents were as active as cats. It was horrible to see the fierce brutes with foaming mouths and glaring eyes, rushing and grasping, but forever missing their elusive enemies, while arrow after arrow buried itself in their hides. One great fellow ran past me, roaring with pain, with a dozen darts sticking from his chest and ribs. In mercy, I put a bullet through his skull, and he fell sprawling among the aloes. But this was the only shot fired, for the attack had been at the center of the line, and the Indians there had needed no help of ours in repulsing it. Of all the ape-men who had rushed out into the open, I do not think that one got back to cover. But the matter was more deadly when we came among the trees. For an hour or more after we entered the wood, there was a desperate struggle in which for a time we hardly held our own. Springing out from among the scrub, the ape-men with huge clubs broke in upon the Indians, and often fell 3 or 4 before they could be speared. Their frightful blows shattered everything upon which they fell. One of them knocked somebody's rifle to matchwood, and the next would have crushed his skull had the Indian not stabbed the beast to the heart. Other 8 men in the trees above us hurled down stones, logs of wood, occasionally dropping bodily onto our ranks and fighting furiously until they were felled. Once our allies broke under the pressure, and had it not been for the execution done by our rifles, they would certainly have been taken to their heels. But they were gallantly rallied by their old chief, and came on with such a rush that the 8 men began to turn to give way. Somebody was weaponless, but I was employing my magazine as quick as I could fire, and on the further flank we heard the continuous cracking of our companions' rifles. Then, in a moment, came the panic and the collapse. Screaming and howling, the great creatures rushed away in all directions through the brushwood, while our allies yelled in their savage delight, following swiftly after their flying enemies. All the feuds of countless generations, all the hatreds and cruelties of their narrow history, all the memories of ill usage and persecution were to be purged that day. At last, man was to be supreme, and the man-beast to find forever his allotted place. Fly as they would, the fugitives were too slow to escape from the active savages, and from every side in the tangled woods we heard the exultant yells, the twanging of bows, and the crash and thud as 8 men were brought down from their hiding places in the trees. I was following the others when I found that Lord John and Challenger had come across to join us. "It's over," said Lord John. "I think we can leave the tidying up to them. Perhaps the less we see of it, the better we shall sleep." Challenger's eyes were shining with the lust of slaughter. "We have been privileged," he cried, strutting about like a gamecock, "to be present at one of the typical decisive battles of history, the battles which have determined the fate of the world. What, my friends, is the conquest of one nation by another? It is meaningless. Each produces the same result. But these fierce fights, when in the dawn of the ages the cave dwellers held their own against the tiger folk, or the elephants first found that they had a master, those were the real conquests, the victories that count. By this strange card of fate, we have seen and helped to decide even such a contest. Now, upon this plateau, the future must ever be for man." It needed a robust faith in the end to justify such tragic means. As we advanced together through the woods, we found the 8 men lying thick, transfixed with spears or arrows. Here and there, a